All right, good morning, good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you are today. I hope your week has been lovely so far and that it's going well. And thank you so much for joining this webinar. I can still see people flowing in, but because of time, we'll just begin and then we'll just welcome people as they continue to flow in. So my name is Nora Thu. I'm part of the PAAN team, and I'll be the host for this webinar. I'm joined with with Kat, who will be taking us through this session for today. And for today's webinar, the topic is how fintech brands can succeed in cross-regional campaigns. So fintech brands often scale faster than their understanding of local markets. They want to expand to different regions outside of where they started. And for this reason, this session focuses on how fintech teams can run cross-functional campaigns that are relevant, trustworthy, and compliant without fragmenting or the brand or oversimplifying because of cultural differences. So what you'll focus on is one, why fintech messaging needs to change across different regions, the trust, the language, and cultural signals in financial marketing, balancing consistency with the local relevance, and managing regulatory and consumer expectations across different markets. Last but not least, we'll also focus on the common mistakes fintech brands make when they are expanding. Yeah, so Kat will be the one who will be leading us, and Kat is the founder and managing director of DoubleShift. DoubleShift is a brand and creative leadership agency for high trust, complexity businesses with deep expertise in fintech, payments infrastructure, and financial services. So he also serves as a CMO, Chief Marketing Officer at Monavate. This is a Cambridge-based regulated payments infrastructure company, an FCA-registered e-money institution, and a principal member of MasterCard, Visa, and Discover, which are the top fintech brands that have presence in a lot of regions. So leading an agency while operating as in-house CMO inside the regulated fintech infrastructure, gives Kat a perspective most in the industry cannot access. So he works on both sides of the trust equation, helping fintech businesses close the gap between what they have built already and what the market believes about them. So this dual role positions DoubleShift as a strategic and creative leadership partner that does not just understand how fintech from the outside works, but also operates inside it. So without further ado, we'll just welcome Kat to take us through his presentation, which will be about 30 to 40 minutes. I encourage everyone to leave a question in the chat. If you have an idea or maybe pick something from what he presents. If you have a question, even out of your own experiences for the brands that you work with that are in this fintech space, things that you want us to discuss as a team that Kat can address in his Q&A session, kindly leave your questions and we'll make it as engaging as possible. Without further ado, Kat, I hand it over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Nora. That's very kind of you. I'm going to pull up a quick deck that I'm going to take us all through today. Nora, you've done a generous introduction, so thank you for that. I'll get straight into the meat of it. I'm a big fan, if I can, at the start of this, just setting some house rules. I'm a big fan of what I call Sunday lunch rules, which means that you're allowed to interrupt, you're allowed to ask kind of any question, as long as we all leave here still friends, right? Nothing too offensive that people take offense home with them rather than just leftovers. So if there are questions along the way, Nora, you're welcome to flag me. I'm going to be kind of looking at a presentation as I go through this, so I won't be able to follow the Q&A, but please feel free to interrupt. At the start of this as well, I think what's important to acknowledge is that this is a pretty niche topic, right? Talking specifically about fintech businesses and brands that are scaling cross-regional, we'll have quite a focus today on Africa, of course, But it is intention to talk about global. But what is fair for us to all consider here is that this speaks to and agrees with many other high complexity, generally regulated industries. So whether that be medtech, whether that be kind of new financial services or similar to the same, it is, for the most part, a translatable model. And I think that there's some nuggets and some experience and some mistakes we've made ourselves that we've learned from that'll be able to translate across those. So if you don't specifically work on this vertical, like Nora mentioned when she introduced us, we do work across high trust, high complexity businesses, which often have a regulatory or a license component to them. And this does translate over to some of those as well. The fascinating thing about fintech brands and what we really love being a part of with our clients is that these are very fast moving organizations. They're generally heavily product driven. They have founders and founding teams that are technically very strong. They often have great understanding of the infrastructure required and the compliance and regulation required to be able to expand their services and their product very quickly into new markets. But the difficulty here is, how does the brand and how does our communication to audiences keep the same pace? In the same way that product innovation always moves before regulation, right? Amazing new things happen, and then the regulators, the reserve banks, the relative local government will go, well, we don't know how to treat a rule for that. Very often brand reacts the same way because we're not really sure how to communicate this new value proposition to our audience. And so what we see as a superpower from a product perspective is very often a liability and quite a difficult curveball for marketing and brand teams. To this topic of contextualizing campaigns and the brand per region, the classic example of maybe what works in London won't work in Lagos, but it really does get quite a lot more granular. This morning I'm reporting live from Somerset West, just outside of Cape Town in South Africa. And the reality is that we have a very different audience in Cape Town, a lot more cosmopolitan, a lot more foreign nationals who are living here from European countries, where if we go 1,000 kilometers northeast to Johannesburg or Pretoria, the capital city, we also have a cosmopolitan view, but a lot more African nationals who've moved down into those territories. So what might not work, what might work in Cape Town may not stick the same way in Pretoria. So that local nuance piece is incredibly important. And the risk that we have is we generally want to paint the entire territory with the same message. And that's where it falls apart. Product often has the benefit of going, well, we're going to offer this capability to all of these regions, but the message requires a little bit of nuance. And there's often friction within these organizations between their legal teams, their technology teams or their product teams, and marketing, because they are aggressive about wanting to expand this product team. They're very excited about what they've built. They're very proud of what they've built. And marketing has this uncomfortable job of going, well, who do we sell it to? Why do they care? What is the messaging that makes sense? And that's not just emotive, that has a regulatory compliance factor. There are certain claims that you cannot make. If you don't have a bank license, you can't talk about banking. I'll get into a little bit more about that later, though. The 5 areas, Nora, thanks. You've already touched on the highlights reel, so I'm going to get straight into it. And this is really about why messaging needs to change or become contextualized across regions. So jumping into that a little bit more, I mentioned this idea of trying to find the right audience and find the right language that resonates with them. There really is a requirement to have a much deeper understanding of the marketplace that you're entering when it comes to looking at a language that we're going to use to be able to speak to that audience. So if we look at, I've given the example here of Nairobi versus Frankfurt. If we look at a lower banking access market, or a market that I always find really interesting is Zimbabwe broadly. Now, Zimbabwe, an experience that I've not had in South Africa and many people around the world have never had, is many people my age or a little bit older. I mean, everyone here looks at me and they go, oh, he's got to be 21, 22. Thank you. I'm not. I've hit 34. So I'm in my prime, apparently. But many people my age or a little bit older who grew up in Zimbabwe, they have twice experienced their government failing them from a banking perspective. South Africa, boasts about having one of the most robust financial institutions in Africa and even in the world. But Zimbabwe has a completely different context, right? The infrastructure itself has failed. We all, many of us, maybe let me not say we all, many of us would remember kind of horrible images of people leaving banks with wheelbarrows full of cash. They had this rapid inflation over the course of a couple of days. The inflation rate was calculated per hour. I mean, it is scary. So within the Zimbabwean market, there is a deep distrust around infrastructure and formalized financial services like banking. Now, if you compare that to South Africa, if you compare that to Germany, right, the market context around banking is completely different. So when we look at a lower banking access market, you've got to be very careful to talk about what we would assume is this trusted institution that is banking. There's a lot of talk in financial services where you might have heard this, some of you, where they talk about banking the unbanked. And everybody gets very excited about banking the unbanked. And the assumption is that the unbanked are only unbanked because they haven't had access. They haven't had a bank close enough to them or infrastructure that allows them to be able to set up accounts. I think sometimes people are unbanked because they don't want a bank, right? Like the unbanked piece, we forget that people have agency and decision. And many people will choose to not join a banking system. They may choose to use a crypto wallet, which is not a bank. They may choose to rely on cash, like many people have for hundreds of years. So this piece around the market maturity around your particular financial service or your brand's offering, super, super important, because that same value proposition, very different based on the context that you're serving it into. If we, again, further to that, there isn't just the financial literacy or the, let me say, the maturity of the space. Financial literacy is its own kind of kettle of fish. The number of acronyms that get thrown around, the proverbial boardroom bingo when it comes to APRs, OTCs, ETFs, it's completely overwhelming for an end user. And perhaps worse than that, sometimes makes people feel stupid. One of my favorite ones growing up was people always spoke about ATM machines, right? Like, I'm going to go draw some cash from the ATM machine. But the M in ATM stands for machine. It's an automatic or automated teller machine. So even there, this term that everyone's supposed to know, do we really know what ATM stands for? And that's the one that most people do know. As soon as you start going into ETFs, when you talk about derivatives, you use the term stablecoin, which not an acronym, but a new financial term, people start to get quite uncomfortable. The channel reality is whether you've kind of looked at, YouTube is a university in and of itself. If you look at a lot of the mainstream knowledge, right, which I think we can fairly say often comes from the West, there isn't a fair appreciation for the channel realities that we might face in African markets. But further than that, what are the channel realities in a cross-regional approach? Because where WhatsApp may have a really strong presence in certain markets, we find that Facebook groups are still incredibly relevant across Africa in certain community groups. Something I was incredibly surprised by recently was that Mixit, which I grew up on Mixit, right? Like Mixit was super cool when I was a kid in South Africa. Mixit still has a significant audience base in recent years across Africa. When I heard that, mind blown. I didn't even know that that was a channel that still existed. If you start to consider newer financial services, there's a lot of people who refuse to use WhatsApp because there's a belief that, and I'm not sharing an opinion on this, there's a belief that Zuckerberg's treatment of data is not great, right? And the Meta group, not just Zuckerberg. So you've got people using Signal and Telegram. All of these are such a challenge in marketing because you have to, again, to that understanding of the marketplace that you're entering, you really need to know not just message, but the medium that that message is received in. Telegram in Web3 or crypto natives, Telegram groups are massive. If you have influencers on TikTok, they very often will divert their audience bases to Telegram and find that that's actually where they monetize their audiences with product and services. So some people love that. Other people have a hesitance to move over to Telegram because they feel like they're going to be sold at. This is such a dynamic space, right? And then you'll see later we talk about the regulatory lens that comes to that. So it's not just message, it's also medium that needs to be considered as we go. So let's talk about trust. Everything when it comes down to financial services, and actually most products and services that we would engage with do have trust and signals that come to them, right? And language is contextual, but there are cultural signals that we need to interpret when we're building out our approach. But there's also cultural signals that we give when we have adopted a certain brand, right? We use brands. An entire topic for another day is just how we use brands to express our own identity and the identity of the groups we want to associate with. As I say, topic for another day. So depending on the different market that you might find yourself in, and again, we've spoken now about message, we've moved on to channel, but the attitude or the approach that we take strategically in different markets is also something that becomes really important. In cultures that have a high authority gap, right? So authority gap is effectively, and this is a very succinct summary of it, maybe let me say not the most sophisticated summary of it, is the relative emphasis that the general person or the citizen would place in engaging with a leadership figure. Now, in South Africa, we generally have what we call a low authority gap, which means that subordinates or employees are generally not scared or not intimidated to be able to approach their line manager or senior leadership to broach a difficult topic. If you look to the East, if you look at Asia and in Japan in particular, very, very, very high authority gap, right? Many employees don't even think of speaking to the boss, and if they ever did, would be probably terrified to do so. So if we consider what the authority distance might be in our community, in some places, using that authority adds credibility and builds trust signals, but in others, it might not. I reference again the infrastructure failures in Zimbabwe around financial services. To try and move with an authority-driven approach when you have undermined your own authority is a very difficult play for banks in that space. The community approach is really very interesting, but is a strategic decision, right? When we talk about trust, trust is often inferred to us through the communities that we engage with, right? Identity is a shared group construct. So if you are a part of a particular community, I'm a failed cricketer from way back when, and I'm a massive cricketing fan. In sports in general, though, I would call myself a licorice all sports. I'll probably watch any kind of sporting event under the sun and love the competitive nature. I love the skill set. And what I really love is the competitive cultural component that comes with it. Now, as a Liverpool fan, right, which is what I would say that I am, I've supported that football team and their players and that club from a significant distance since I was 5 years old, right? So we're going on 30 years. I have never been to the city of Liverpool. I've never been in Anfield. obviously, the stadium that Liverpool play in. And yet I have this affinity to the community of Liverpool Football Club. And so if they were to adopt a financial service brand as a sponsor, which they have done, you would assume, and it is correct to assume, that as being a part of that community, because of my trust in the primary brand of that community or the leader of that community, the related brands would carry a greater weight than if I just came across them at a bus stop, right? So when we think about community and bring it closer to home, when we find the authority, the trusted authority figures or the trusted authority brands within a community, and we can partner with that entity, that brand, that individual, those influencers, which is why influencer marketing is a channel that's so often used, we get this inferred trust, right? It's almost this halo effect that we get to jump on. Even further than that is the relationship first component. In a massively digital era, we find that relationships have become fickle and far between. Really, for the most part, gone are the days of having your personal banker that you met when you were 20 and they know about all of your financial affairs, right? Generally, people are taking control of those things themselves. They're dealing with digital financial services that they can spin out their own cards or create their own accounts. And support is really just a chatbot, right? It's a really smart, because of LLM integration, digital communication channel that might have a personality because someone programmed it, but isn't really a real person. And so to take a relationship first approach to genuinely build human relationships is actually a really strong differentiator and trust building factor that doesn't have the same impact as digital. It doesn't scale as well. It is more complicated from a human resource basis, but we are finding that in many territories, relationship first remains very strong. Whereas the quick call to action feels too transactional, this is a strategic approach that enables trust to be built instead of that kind of quick fix feeling that sometimes we hope digital will have. Important to say here that localization is not just translation. It's not just taking your campaign that you developed in English first South Africa and go, please translate this to Francophone, right? Thank you, ChatGPT, or good old Google Translate, the OG of online translating services. That is such a low bar to be able to say that you've genuinely adapted to the audience that you're wanting to serve. There needs to be all of this context that we've spoken about, understanding of marketplace, understanding of channels, understanding of messaging as it pertains to those channels, knowing that you have a strategy around how you want to approach the market to build trust. That is when we start to look at what is true localization. Language, the spoken language or the written language, is just one component, but only one. There are many. Okay. In that way, creative has the opportunity to build trust, but can very quickly break it as well. Again, I'm probably misquoting the phrase, but let me make this more personal. Yesterday, I celebrated 8 years of marriage to my adorable wife. That has been a decade-long journey, because there's the dating period before, of building trust. It's relational, it's deeply intimate, we know each other's lives inside out, but trust is built over time. I see a floating clapping hands. I don't know who said that, but thank you. That trust has built over an incredibly long and beautiful period of time. It can easily be broken, and we all know how, right? We can all assume how to break trust in a relationship like that. I probably have a healthy distrust for my own decision-making ability. I have coaches and advisors, and I see a psychologist, and I really am fascinated by my own psychology. But I've often said that I think that any human and any organization is 3 decisions away from total ruin. You just need to make 3 bad decisions, sometimes less. You can make a really bad 1 decision, and your whole life can change for the worse. It often takes so many good decisions to build trust, but you really can erode it quite quickly. So if you're not able to shape your representation in the market, if you can't show a mirror to your audience where they feel like their identity, their culture, their likes, their taste, their context, their actual personhood and identity is reflected, you're not going to be able to build trust with that audience. I've emphasized this already. I do want to double click on it again, but just talk about how crucial community is when we are building relationship and when we're building trust for a brand. There's a phrase I often use, and I say that community is the new gold. Now, that's probably stolen from Satoshi and Bitcoin. When he wrote his white paper on Bitcoin, he spoke about this being, Bitcoin is often referred to as the new gold, right? Community still remains that. As much as AI is evolving and LLMs are becoming incredible data lakes for us to be able to pull insights, the speed of work is so incredible. We have tools like this and forums like this to be able to speak with people around the world. The reality is you could walk away from a conversation like this, maybe only ever see my face on LinkedIn again, and there would really not be the most trust built over time, right? I think, and kudos to Nora and the Pan-African Agency Network, community is still so crucial. We have YouTube, we have the university of the internet to be able to find all of this information. You can Google almost anything, or use chat or Claude, or for anybody who's still using Bing, like hit the software update on your life. It's 2026. Unnecessary shot at their stack. But we can find out any amount of information. What we can't find is community, right? That's so hard. It's so difficult to find like-minded peers, people who we can be vulnerable with and share with and learn from. That is so important for us. I mean, I think that's arguably why many of you are here. It's why many of you are a part of this network. The same is true for our audiences. They want to be in a group of people that they identify with, that they trust, that they feel safe with. We have done this for centuries, right? We have built tribes and civilizations based on a shared understanding of identity, social contracts around, well, if you do this, I'll do that, and we're going to be okay together, right? You do the farming, I'll do the hunting. Someone looks after building and security. Can someone please also do, I don't know, a bit of building LLMs? No, that hasn't really been the case in times gone by. But we have this sense of identity. Community is still so crucial. There's a number of different ways to access community. I'll share this on this deck on whoever does want to look at it, and I think this could be an interesting topic in the Q&A. I'm aware of time, so I'm gonna flash through this a little bit. I've only got a couple of minutes, but I think we've already touched on some interesting topics that we could get into in the chat. To balance consistency with local relevance is a little bit of a dance. A lot of people maybe don't appreciate the distinction between brand and marketing. It's not just that they're spelled differently. I'm not assuming anybody's interpretation of this now, so I don't mean to sound like I'm the only one on the call who knows. In general, brand is the fixed identity of a business that allows people to identify with it, recognize it over time, and build salience. It's a encapsulation internally and externally of the culture and value proposition of a brand over time. What is flexible is expressions of brand and how we take brand to market. Marketing is when we take a value proposition or a message in particular. Brand marketing is about marketing the brand to a particular audience. And it's that flexible marketing component that we really need to focus on when we're tailoring it. But what we can't do is change the core premise of our brand as we move from territory to territory. A good example, Revolut, a fantastic international neobank brand, are moving to South Africa, applying for a full license. They're wanting to use South Africa as a launchpad to move through Africa. They're not arriving in South Africa and translating Revolut to one of our 11 languages, right? It's still Revolut. Everything looks and feels the same. Their expression will be different, I suspect, but the brand core remains consistent. When it comes to what this looks like, there's kind of a pendulum of best practice. The one is when it's overly centralized, when the head office in New York City dictates what all of the creative will look like around the world, it generally gets a little bit shitty. It loses its quality. Apologies. On the other end of the spectrum, before I focus on the middle, is when there's this laissez-faire. Everybody can do what they want. Here's a general guideline, but have fun with it. That's so dangerous for being able to build a consistent brand over time. The middle is I would argue is best practice, where you have a strong sense of central control, where you've established what the brand is, you've established territory and your approach to each different market, but you've got specialists or partners in market who are able to finesse that down to the relevant market understanding and take that market to the people of that market. So that's this kind of central services with local speciality and execution. Regulatory and consumer expectations. I'm gonna jump over this because this is an entire kettle of fish in and of itself. Effectively here, the one legal component and regulation component you have to consider in all of your campaigns is, what does the local government and regulator say about what you are allowed to claim or share with the market or not? The basics like data privacy, there is no question about keeping data privacy. Marketing and brand, everybody who talks externally to external stakeholders are consistently the most risky part of any fintech brand, because they could claim something in public that could put your financial service provider license or your regulatory position into question with a regulator. You might think it's a really clever campaign to go, ditch the banks, come to us. You could lose a regulatory license depending on how that moves out into the market. Always beware of the regulator. Non-compliance doesn't just cost fines, it costs trust, it could cost your licenses. So it's not just the audience who would break trust with. If you lose trust with a regulator, you lose the opportunity to expand rapidly over time. I'm going to skip over this. I'm going to share a couple of good mistakes that we've seen in the market. Some of these we've made ourselves, so there's an experience shared to it too. But again, it's this assumption that whatever works in one territory will work in others. It's the lazy, paint it all in the same color. I think perhaps what's worse than that, so there was a period in my life where I worked for Nike in France, absolutely loved it. I know this is being recorded, so I'll say this on record. I only worked for Nike because I didn't get through the interview rounds at Adidas. Would have preferred to go there. Nike had this problem coming out of the 90s and the early 2000s. I worked there in 2015, so well before my time. But they had a problem which they called pink and shrink, where effectively they would take their best performing men's product lines and just make it pink and smaller and assume that the female market are going to all adopt that. Yeah, they had male brand managers running female product lines as well as male product lines. So this pink and shrink idea was such a, I suppose I could say it's just an epic fail. It did not have the performance in the market that they thought it would. It alienated many of their female audiences because they felt they could see it, right? It was pretty transparent. And if we launch without a local voice, if we launch without that local context, we do the same thing in financial services. And when it comes to financial services, it's not just the sports bra you might choose or the running shoe that you might choose, which is a fast-moving consumer good. This is something that takes deep trust, right? You don't need to cross a big gap to buy a sports shirt. You need to cross a really big one to be able to move your money into a new financial service. So absolutely no from making mistakes locally. When you've got really strong technical teams with a really strong product, the temptation is to speak product at the consumer, right? You use all of those acronyms. You tell them about why Solana is such a fantastic blockchain and why we used Fireblocks as our white label stablecoin partner. And actually everything is in a one-to-one reserve, so you don't have to worry, right? The only difference is that our database is Solana and the bank's database is SQL. Your consumer, well, they're probably gone already. Or they're doing that thing where they go, yeah, cool. You've built no trust, right? We must understand that audience empathetically and then find a way that we take the core components of that value proposition, the reasons why they should trust us, the problems that this technology solves, and communicate with that. When we assume that we're going to get all the crypto bros and the tech nerds to resonate with a message, very, very small market. I've skipped over this, but the threat is real. Compliance is not an afterthought. It's not something that you do a search if function at the end of a campaign and go, is this fine? You've got to be compliance forward. It is so, so crucial. None of, all the flashy messaging, you can attract hundreds of thousands, millions of users. If you lose your license, you lose your business. Measuring the wrong things. This is not just for fintech services. I think we probably on this call would agree that it's in many, many audiences. Brand awareness. What does that mean in one community versus another? In a German market, is it a front of shirt sponsor of one of the big teams? In a Zimbabwean market, what does that look like? Maybe where they don't have the same maturity of sports, professional sports. This idea of what we measure and assuming that the measures are the goals. As soon as we get very excited about the green arrows and the red, less red arrows, more green arrows, if we're not focused on, are we genuinely building trust? Are we seeing the consumer behavior that we want, not just downloading platform, depositing money, increased volume of transactions? We've got to remind ourselves that those are still the same things. And where us marketing agencies get a little bit naughty is we want to show green arrows, we want to show traffic, we want to show clicks and downloads. We've got to remember that we're measuring performance of the business, not just kind of ego metrics is what I'd call them. Man, defaulting to paid media. I'm a big fan of performance marketing. I think it absolutely has the right place in the right market, but I do think it's massively overstated still in 2026. If we just assume that boosting that social post or a Google, whatever your stack integration is, if we just assume that a retargeting campaign on Google is going to get people to trust you and close that gap that's needed to be able to transact value, it really is so much more sophisticated than that. That's not a knock on any performance marketing agencies that are here, but it's a reminder that if you are a performance marketing agency, that is not enough to create a really strong, trusted, omni-channel, omni-territory brand over time. I think the beauty of what this network is doing is allowing those specialists to be able to collaborate. So if you're not already looking at doing that, this network's a great platform to find those partners. I'll close by saying this, and then we can have a chat. But the brands that do well are the ones who have the most cultural intelligence possible. There's a great quote, and I believe it was Einstein, who said that if I was given an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend the first 50 minutes understanding the question. I would say if I could panel beat that, it would be about understanding the culture and understanding the cultural context. If you have that intelligence, if you have that understanding and that know-how, if you can feel that cultural je ne sais quoi, get into the communities that you're going to rather than just defaulting to a ChatGPT deep search that you hope is going to give you the context. If you've got a deep appreciation for that context, those are the brands who, in our experience, build the most powerful trust-building campaigns over time. All right, so close with a question is, if your next regional campaign is in the process or in progress, and again, like I said, that's not from one country to another or one continent to another, it may well be, but from one city to another, have you engaged with the market? So who in this market, who has that cultural intelligence, has had input on this brief? If it's no one, start there. Go find someone in that market, because we often have the bad habit of building great campaigns around the boardroom that the internal stakeholders love with no consideration of what the external stakeholders need. Close monologue. That's me for now.
Great. Thank you, Kurt. I think maybe a question to your question is, how would you advise the different brand marketers to find the right person to represent different regions or different cultural aspects? Like, what should they be looking for to identify this person who can easily and effectively give them the advice that they need to have to shape the campaigns for different regions.
Yeah, great. Look, and I think if I put down my hat of being a CMO and I pick up my hat of being agency leader, we sometimes have a bit of a bad habit in agencies of assuming that we know our customers' context better than they do. A really, really good starting point is to go to your clients, go to the custodians of the brand and say, do you have customers locally? Do you have stakeholders that you've engaged with, that you've decided have given you enough feedback that this is the territory where you should be, and can we spend time with them rather than just taking the brief from you? So asking your sponsor, asking your client, who locally is their advocate, is their people group that they have engaged with. Now, unfortunately, there's many times where they'll say, je ne sais pas, right? We just don't have that. Ideally there, and I've got my colleague Corey on the call who is incredible when it comes to research and understanding the audience that we want to go after. Ideally, then you need to build out a forum. You want to be able to create a focus group. You may have to quite literally pound the ground, get dirt on your shoes, go to the communities that you're trying to engage with, and whether that requires you to incentivize people to join a focus group, whether you can find local organizations that may have representatives who are keen to give you feedback, or maybe very interestingly to the context of this call, finding specialist partners or specialist agencies who are working in that territory and have experience in that territory, and spending some consulting fees to get their know-how. But you will find that short of your client having a sponsor locally, having individuals that you can engage with locally, the value that you will provide for them is to go and find it. And sometimes that's quite a hack and crack process. I wish I had a simpler, cleaner answer where you just go, just do this, just do that, and you'll find it. But again, that speaks to the contextual nuance of each territory. There is a way to engage each territory. Part of the finding that stakeholder is where you're learning the contextual intelligence of that community as well.
All right, thank you. That was actually a good answer because it's never a black or white situation depending on what you're dealing with. So you've given different aspects and different things that we can either incorporate together or do one by one, and then maybe see how the kind of results you get from each activity or endeavor. Yeah, so maybe I'll welcome any question from anyone in the attendee list. But thank you so much, Kat. That was very informative. It's given a perspective of how to think about, dealing with different regions, same way you said, we do a lot of planning in the boardroom as a brand team, but then we can plan, but we might be missing the first fundamental thing that will make the campaign a success. So thank you for giving context to that. Yeah, so I don't know if there's anyone in the team. Yes, I can see a comment on this is eye-opening. This is an eye-opening conversation. So yeah, I can see James. Thank you. James agrees. I don't know if there's anyone in the attendee who has a question. You can drop it in the chat. Yes, so maybe as we continue to see the questions coming up, so if you would want to, get more information, get more clarity, you can always reach out to DoubleShift. I will also be able to send this presentation, this recording to you on email. I know we had a longer list of registered attendees who may have not been able to join. So we'll also share this with them. And you can always reach out to DoubleShift and get more clarity, get more assistance, more consultation on how to actually venture into different markets, and of course have a successful campaign for either yourself or your brands. That's the goal at the end of the day.
Nora, if I could share something, perhaps for those who've not yet had a crack at a question, to your note around how do we find the right stakeholders locally, or how do we find the right people locally to advocate for the communities that we want to market to? I think something that and again, this is an anecdotal observation, this is a behavior that I've observed in our own agency as we've kind of built and rebuilt it over the years. We get so obsessed with frameworks, strategy, efficiency, recipes. We love that, right? We want the recipe. We want to be able to do it faster and faster, repeatably, with better results, stakeholder value, ROI. So many brand and marketing agencies have just lost their curiosity. They've lost the appetite and the intrigue of learning about a new audience before you try and market at them. And I take that critique myself as well. This is something that I'm reflecting on in our own business. Is, you know, we like to sit behind our laptops. We like to sit in boardrooms when they bring the muffins and the coffee in. It's difficult. It's difficult to get up really early in the morning and go to a community that you're not comfortable with because you don't know their context. And despite me doing this, I really have to switch it on, right? Like, I'm a pretty introverted guy. I'm gonna end this call, and I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna breathe a sigh of relief, right? So it's difficult for me to be able to get up and go because I want to see how people commute to work in the morning. Let me get somewhere at 5 o'clock in the morning that is perhaps a 2-hour drive from my house because I want to learn about this community. Like, can I just Google it at 8 o'clock when I get to my office? So and that's value we provide to our client, right? We get stuck in these things of, well, we've got a set list of deliverables, or we've got a set number of hours, and that's what we have to do for the client, right? The client's going to ask you, well, what have you delivered against these milestones? And one of the beautiful things I think we provide to those clients is the curiosity, is saying to them, hey, like, we want to get into those communities, and not just ourselves, but take the client there as well. So yeah, I think the challenge maybe to myself, even when I was kind of working through this approach, is it can get really sterile. We can get very methodical, and we lose the intrigue of going, wow, I've learned something new. I've learned about a new group of people that I didn't understand before. I've learned their values, and we can really build something that serves them and intrigues them, rather than going, ooh, like, what type of dialect of French is this? Like, that's not deep enough. That's not good enough if we get stuck there.
Yeah, I have to agree because we can easily now Google and look at the recommendations we get. But if you think about it, there's so many other companies that are also Googling. So we are basically all getting sort of the same answer. So at the end of the day, there might not be a key differentiating factor between your campaign and your competitor's campaign, because you've probably not done the groundwork to actually, figure out what's happening in 2026, take yourself out there and just see if there's anything different. Sometimes there might be the same thing you're getting online, but it's also a benefiting thing, because you might get something that you would never imagine if you Googled or asked ChatGPT or any other AI tool. Or yeah, so that's a key highlight, the curiosity aspect of brand managers, campaign strategists, and everyone involved in handling the client and the campaign. So thank you for. Yeah, I think we can close it at that point. So yeah, I think as I've mentioned, we'll share this recording with all attendees plus those who registered. You can always reach out to either us as from PAAN or DoubleShift, and then we can always work together in future to make our work better, easier, and more collaborative and impactful. So yeah, so I want to say thank you to you, Kat. Thank you for taking time to, create this presentation, your knowledge sharing, the fact that you've taken it, you've spared some time to, work on this and also share this information with us. Do not take it for granted, and we also pray for your success in everything that you do and within your team. Yeah, so thank you so much. I just want to thank you also all the attendees. Thank you for sparing time. I know it's Wednesday. We've come from a long holiday, so there's so many things to catch up on. We want to say thank you, and we'll hope that you'll be joining us for more webinars that we'll have. We have one coming up next week. Let's make this interactive. We always appreciate all attendees that join, because this is a point of knowledge sharing. The community that Kat has mentioned, this is how we benefit from each other. So thank you so much. I wish you guys a lovely rest of your Wednesday and week ahead. Thank
Thank
you
you
so
so much,
much.
Nora. Thanks, everybody. Chat soon.
Bye-bye.